This program is designed to provide general information with regards to the subject matters covered. This information is given with the understanding that neither the hosts, guests, sponsors, or station are engaged in rendering any specific and personal, medical, financial, legal, counseling, professional service, or any advice. You should seek the services of competent professionals before applying or trying any suggested ideas. The information contained in this podcast is intended for informational purposes only and is not a substitute for individual professional legal advice. The podcast information was carefully compiled from vetted sources and references. However, R.O.S.E Resources Outreach to Safeguard the Elderly cannot guarantee that you will not fall victim to a scam. Let's talk about scams. It's the must-listen show for anyone who wants to protect themselves and their loved ones from scams. Every Tuesday at 8 a.m. Pacific Time on K4HD Radio, Joyce Petrowski, founder of R.O.S E, and her guests will provide valuable insights and practical tips on how to recognize and protect yourself from scams. And now, here is your host, Joyce Petrowski.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Brian Watson, Community Outreach Specialist for R.O.S E, Resources Outreach to Safeguard the Elderly. Joyce is not available this week. I'm filling in this week and then 2 more weeks after that. So today we have a guest. We were having a little bit of technical issues. Juan, is Ken still with us right now? There he is. Okay, beautiful. Just wanted to make sure we didn't lose him with internet issues. So today we have the pleasure of having a guest. Ken Westbrook is the founder and CEO of Stop Scams Alliance. They are a 501c3 nonprofit whose mission is to significantly reduce scams in the United States. Their focus is to stop scams at the source before they reach the consumer in the first place. So last year in 2025, I heard Ken speak on a webinar, and there were several different guests, but his presentation really stood out to me because I was impressed by the detail of the information he shared. I used to work at the R.O.S.E, so I'm all about numbers. So numbers tell a story, and I thought it was super helpful to me, and I thought his information would be super helpful for our audience. And I'm a big fan of collaboration. We all have to work together, build each other up, share information, and we all have different areas that we focus on. And I know Ken has some just great information. So Ken, good morning and welcome to the show.
Good morning to you. Thank you for hosting me today. Sorry about being late a little bit, but I'm looking forward to having a good discussion with you. And by the way, I'm a numbers freak too. So if we get too geeky for anybody, I apologize for that in advance. But numbers, as you said, numbers are really important.
They really are because, especially when we look at the FBI's elder fraud report or any data from the Federal Trade Commission, we can see that the trend is not good in the United States. The numbers are getting worse every single year.
Yeah, and worse than
Ken,
that.
let's start out. What was your reason for starting Stop Scams Alliance?
Well, so my personal story is I didn't know all that much about scams. I read stories about them in the news, of course, and I knew that they were an issue. But in February of 2023, my mom was scammed. She got a pop-up on her computer that said that her computer had been hacked and she needed to call Microsoft. And when she called the 1-800 number, she was talking to criminals who ended up stealing most of her life savings. So with that incident, I started to look into this situation and I became really alarmed because it wasn't only my mom. It's millions of moms and millions of dads and millions of even younger people are now being scammed at industrial scale. And at that point, given my government background, I figured I just need to throw my hat in the ring and help safeguard the country from this attack.
Now, where did you learn that most of these scams are originating from?
Well, my professional background is in the CIA. I served there for 33 years as an analyst. And so I'm familiar with foreign threats and how to analyze them. And what I did after my mom's scam was to look at the US government data, but even more importantly, British data and Australian data. And the British government, for its part, in 2022 declared scams a national security threat, and they said that it amounts to most of the crime complaints that they get now in the UK are scams instead of other types of crimes. And then they go on to say that about 70% by their estimation is foreign based. And so with that, I started to poke around and ask former colleagues in the government about this. And privately, they all tell me that in the US, they think it's about 90%. They haven't written that down very much so far, but I do put the pieces together from what has been written down to put the case out there that most scams are foreign originated. And the countries involved are China, the ethnic Chinese crime gangs in Southeast Asia. West Africa is a center. Also, India is a center in South Asia. But the bad news is that this business model has gotten to be so lucrative that it's now starting to spread around the world. It used to be Southeast Asia based. Now, scam centers are popping up in South America, in the Middle East, even in Europe. So it's really spreading like wildfire.
When I do in-person public presentations talking about scam prevention, I always get the question, why don't we just go after these people? What is the challenge with these overseas criminal organizations?
Well, so the thing is that U.S. law enforcement's jurisdiction ends at our border. So when you have mainly a foreign origin crime, these people are mainly located in other countries outside of our jurisdiction, and they're attacking us via the internet and via our telephone system. And so it's now difficult for our law enforcement, not that they don't try, they try really hard to go after these guys. And they can on occasion seize money. There was a recent seizure, a very large seizure of cryptocurrency from a Southeast Asian crime gang. And they can also sanction the countries or the criminal groups involved. But when it comes to putting them behind bars, they have to depend on the cooperation of the foreign countries, and they're not getting enough of that, frankly.
So at the beginning of the show, you had mentioned the United Kingdom and Australia having success in combating scams. And you said one of the reasons they're treating it as a national security threat, something that I've seen you write that we need to do here as well.
Right.
What are some specific examples of things that the UK and Australia are doing right?
Well, so the first thing I would say is that they've recognized that this is a major problem and they've prioritized their government to fight back. In both cases, in the UK and Australia, there's someone in charge of fraud policy. Whereas in the US, if you ask who is in charge of fraud policy, the answer is nobody. There was a recent GAO report, actually, that said that there were 13 agencies of the US government that have some jurisdiction over scams, but none of them have a strategic plan. There's no overarching strategic plan. The US simply has not recognized the size of this problem at the federal government level. In the UK and Australia, they have. In the UK, the the British Home Office is in charge, and they actually have a former member of Parliament who's in charge of fraud policy. In the case of Australia, they've assigned the responsibility to the Treasury Department. So there they have an official who organizes the Australian government to fight back more effectively. So that's number one, is just to recognize the problem and put somebody in charge. The second one, in both cases, UK and Australia, they have created mechanisms to centralize data from victims, from banks, from social media, from telecom companies, so that they can get a better threat intelligence picture. We haven't done that in the US either. And then the third piece is a little more complicated. It would take a little more time to explain, but basically it has to do with putting measures in place to know who is on the other end of a phone call, who's on the other end of an online ad, who's on the other end of a website, who's on the other end of a text message. We don't have those mechanisms in the United States, but other countries are putting authentication mechanisms in place so that people are can have a better judgment about who they're communicating with.
One of the other questions I get from audience members at presentations is, why can't our government and the phone companies stop these incoming scam phone calls, especially the ones where, they'll spoof the same area code to kind of give it some legitimacy. And the best answer I usually give is these scammers can spoof. They can do voice over IP. They're very technically savvy in terms of making their overseas phone calls appear legitimate. Is our government doing enough with that? Are the phone companies doing enough? What, or and also any of these other big tech companies? Are we doing enough, and can we do more?
No, they're not doing enough, and yes, we could do more. The good news is that, let me give you a couple of examples of recent moves to do more. In the case of Google and Android phones, starting in March of 2025, so that would be about 9 months ago now, Google started to analyze voice and text messages when the voice and text message is unencrypted on your device. They use artificial intelligence at the edge on your device. It never goes to Google servers. It's all done on your device. What Google does is to detect characteristics of a scam text or phone call, and then they warn the user, or they take the scam message down. So, and there's been an independent study that shows that's quite effective. So it seems as if Google has found a way using artificial intelligence. The bad guys are using artificial intelligence against us. So let's use our artificial intelligence. The US has the best AI in the world. So let's use our AI to defend ourselves. And Google has a good stab at how to do that. I haven't seen a reaction from Apple yet, but I'll bet you they're planning a similar thing. Another on the phone side, after some lobbying that took place, the FCC in October released a rulemaking process, and they're asking for comments now. And actually, the comments are due in a week, and I'm working on a reply. The proposal from the FCC is to do things like mark foreign phone calls, that you know when you're getting a foreign phone call, and maybe even blocking the foreign call if it's pretending to be a domestic call. So it's a call coming from India, but it's displaying Los Angeles in the caller ID field. Well, that should be a sign of a fraud, and that call could be blocked. And the overall thing that the FCC is proposing to do is to put more authentication in place in caller ID, so that you have a better idea of who the caller is who's contacting you. So all that's good, and Stop Scams Alliance is supporting that, and we're preparing our reply this week.
Beautiful. No, thanks for sharing that. And that's good news, because we get a lot of questions about artificial intelligence and criminals using it. So it's imperative that the good guys use the AI as well.
Right.
So with our nonprofit, we recognize that every age group gets scammed, but the older we get, the more we lose for a variety of reasons. From everything that being in the fraud prevention world, what is the number one scam affecting older adults?
Well, when you look at the FBI data, this is now people who report to the FBI. So it's not everybody does report to the FBI. So it's kind of a fraction of the data, but it's the best we have. So if you look at the FBI data, if you look at the number of victims, the number one scam affecting older people is the tech support scam, the one that got my mom. It starts with a pop-up on your computer, which is normally delivered by a malicious online ad, by the way. And then it freezes your computer, you can't use it. And people in desperation call the 1-800 number, which is in very bold red type there for you to, because the whole point of the pop-up is to get you to call that number. And when you call that number, you are in the hands of transnational organized crime gangs who are very skilled at separating people from their money. If you look at the FBI data a different way and do it by the dollars lost or the reported dollars lost, the number one scam is investment scams. And most of those are fake cryptocurrency investment scams. So someone is coaxed after a period of grooming. They believe that they're talking to somebody who's skilled at cryptocurrency. They're here to help you. And then they coax you into making at first a legitimate cryptocurrency investment. Then they move you to another platform where the profits are manipulated. So it makes it look to the victim like they're making money hand over fist, and that prompts them to put more and more money in until they put all of their money in, and the criminal then pulls the plug and your money's all gone. So this sometimes goes by the name of pig butchering. It's the skill set of the Southeast Asian crime gangs in Myanmar, Cambodia, Laos, and that's by dollars lost. That's the number one scam by far.
Beautiful. Thank you for sharing. Now, I've been telling some people a little bit different when it talks to pig butchering. I always talk that it's a long play scam.
Yes.
They build that trust over a long period of time. They kind of casually mention investing in cryptocurrency, almost to get them to ask about it. But I've been telling people that the original small investment is actually fake, and that they're showing you a portal, because I've spoken to victims who've seen a portal that shows gains. But what you're saying is the initial investment in these cryptocurrencies can actually be legitimate.
So that's my understanding. I could be wrong about that, but I have heard that they often switch you to another platform, and that would be the fake website, of course. Now, what's the first one? I thought it was not legitimate, but it doesn't really matter. At some point in this long con, you're absolutely right. They get people to start, maybe after another period, to start investing in a website that is manipulated. It's owned by the criminals. It looks like a cryptocurrency website, but it's really not. Okay, now on that score, what can we do about it? And let's point back to best practices in Australia and the UK again. In both cases, the UK and Australian governments have national, federal level efforts to find those fake investment websites and to shut them down.
Beautiful.
And every day, Australia is shutting down many of these things. They've shut down, I think, over 3,000 of them in the last few years. And investment scams in Australia are going down, whereas investment scams in the U.S. are going up like a rocket ship. And it may be other factors involved, like there's education, of course, that could be having an impact in Australia. But it seems to me that part of the dent that Australia is making in the bad guys' profits is the federal effort to find the fake investment websites and to shut them down quickly.
Now, yeah, when I heard you speak at that webinar, the thing that impressed me is you pointed out the stats for the tech support scam. And the thing that jumped out to me was tech support scam losses are 117 times more than ransomware losses. And ransomware seems to get a lot of publicity because, you hear the name of a big company or a school district or, some entity that gets their information locked up and held hostage by these scammers. And then they end up paying these ransoms and losing the money. But your analysis of the data shows that tech support scam is way bigger than the ransomware.
Yes. If you look at both FBI and FTC data, both the FBI and FTC, now this is, again, limited data because it's the data that's reported to the FBI and the FTC, and there's a lot of this is not reported. But nevertheless, both the FBI and the FTC will tell you that ransomware is much less common and much less injurious than the investment scams and the tech support scams and the other confidence scams that go on. Now, one of the reasons that ransomware does get extra attention from our government is ransomware can be the precursor to an attack on our infrastructure, such as shutting down a pipeline or shutting down a hospital. So it's not only the dollars lost in ransomware that's a factor. But our government in 2023, I think, stood up a White House level office, and one of their main efforts is to focus on ransomware. So one of our messages is it's time for the White House to start treating consumer losses, which are far in excess of ransomware, with the same kind of organizational effort. The U.S. has domestic task forces to stamp out ransomware. We have international task forces to stamp out ransomware, but we don't really have a task force that's dedicated to focus on consumer losses from scams.
What percentage of scams do you think are actually reported? We'll never know for sure, but from all the research you've done and the people you've talked to, what do you think that number is?
So don't listen to me. Listen to the FTC. They've done some studies. They've looked at the academic research. They think it's between 2 and 6.7%. 2% if a small dollar amount is lost, but someone who loses more money is more likely to report in their view, and that gets you to the 6.7% mark in their view. There's an independent data point. The Stop Scams Alliance, our organization, asked Gallup to do a survey in October of 2023, and the answer came back from Gallup that 8% of people reported having been victimized by scams. And when you looked at the number, so that's 21 million Americans. And then when you compare that 21 million to the number of people who report to the FBI, it turns out that about 5% of Americans were reporting to the FBI. So I think there's multiple data sources that say 5% plus or minus is about the number of people who actually report. I've looked also at overseas. I speak a lot about the best practices in the UK and Australia, but over there, they say that they think about 10, 15, 20% of people report. And that's under the best practices where the government's really trying to get people to do that and they have centralized reporting. So if the countries doing the best at this can only get to 10 or 20%, it makes perfect sense that we're around the 5% level.
So why is the reporting number so low, in your opinion?
Well, the best data we have comes from a survey that was done by the Global Anti-Scam Alliance last year in late 2025. They found that about 5% of people said that they didn't report because of shame, but they found that much larger numbers, 25% were saying that they didn't report for the following reasons. One is they didn't know how to. Two, it was too complicated. Three, they didn't think it would do any good if they did so. So when you add up those three answers, that's the majority of the reporting, and shame is another reason for it. But so there's a variety of reasons. I can tell you in the case of my family, when my mom was scammed, my brothers were doing a lot of the legwork to report this, and they didn't want to report it first. And I said, but and their argument was, Ken, even if we do, the government's not going to do anything about it anyway. Why should we go through the effort? But I prevailed and did some of the work myself. And so we ended up reporting to over a dozen agencies and companies. And I learned from that experience that it is complicated. There's not one place to go. There's several places to go. And everybody asks for different information. And by the way, nobody ever gets back to you. So
Right.
you're doing the data. What you're doing is you're feeding a data base, which is good, and that allows the government to have better data. But the data show that most people are never contacted and most money is never retrieved.
It's very sad. I do tell people that it is important to report, one, so that the government has good data, and that sometimes too a smaller case can become a bigger case, or they can connect the dots on another one. I've done over 85 presentations, and I always ask that question: what is the number one reason, in your opinion, that people don't report being the victim of a scam?
Mm-hmm.
And I always get the word embarrassment, which goes to what you just said, the shame.
Right.
And then I agree with everything you said there. What's the point? It's too complicated. Some people don't even know they're scammed, so it's absolutely brutal. Now, did you ever see the movie The Beekeeper?
I definitely saw The Beekeeper.
So what was accurate in that movie, and what was not accurate from your knowledge of that particular scam?
By the way, one time I was speaking at a conference, and the person introduced me by saying, you've all seen the Beekeeper movie. Well, let me introduce you to the real beekeeper, and his name is Ken Westbrook. So that was a nice introduction, kind of a humorous way of introducing me.
Right.
So the accurate part, I think they portrayed very well in the beginning of the movie, the elderly person who received a pop-up on her computer, which led to her being enticed to send money to the scammers, and including money that she was holding in a nonprofit for charity purposes. And then the devastating impact that it had on her. She ended up committing suicide. In my mom's case, I mean, it just reminded me so much of my mom's case because she got the pop-up on her computer too. And it did have a devastating effect on her as well. She didn't commit suicide, but I can tell you that from the moment that scam happened in early 2023, her health took a nosedive. And a year later, some FBI agents visited her home to ask her to tell again the story of her being scammed because they were pursuing a case in New York. And while she was thrilled that they were pursuing a case, it brought the whole experience back to her. That evening, she had the first of a series of heart attacks that ended up taking her life within a few months. So my family has a lot of doctors in it, and it seems to them, of just observing her health, that the health, her health went off a cliff after the scam, and then a year later, she was gone.
I'm sorry to hear that. It's horrible. I mean, yeah, people think, scams is just money, but there are collateral effects, like you said, the shame, the PTSD, the playing it over and over. You know, I met a lady in Arizona here who lost $189 in a jury scam, and it had been months, and she told me about it, and she was still beating herself up over it, and most people would think $189 is nothing. No one wants to lose that money, but you're going to survive. But she was still beating herself up because she was basically said, "Oh, I was so dumb," and it was that embarrassment and that shame. And for her, that was a large amount of money because she was on fixed income, living in a very modest place. So I could only imagine it gets even more when there's more dollar losses. The other, just coming back to the beekeeper, Ken, I saw the preview in the movie theater, and I'm like, I have to go see that thing. And when I saw it, I was like, wow, I could see how people fall for it. And when the lady called in, the scammers had an answer for everything because they're professionals. They're organized criminal gangs. But the one thing that jumped out to me that I was like, come on, this can't be real. The scammers happened to be like driving distance from where Jason Statham lived.
Yes, I
And
was
that's
about
the
to
thing
say.
that I was like, come on, it's just too convenient.
Right. So I was about to say that, if we go to the things that are not realistic, the call center being located very near their home in the United States is not realistic at all. The FBI says that the call center, they call these call center scams because the whole point is to get you to call someone to coax you into sending your money. And the FBI says the call center scams originate mainly in South Asia, South Asia, excuse me, mainly in India. When I talk to investigators, India and perhaps Pakistan are the center of the call center scams.
Yeah, it's when I worked for the IRS, the bane of my existence was the IRS impersonation scam.
Right.
And most of the people I talked to who had received that call said the caller had what they considered to be an Indian accent. And right, it's just, and they're just making thousands, if not millions of calls and just hoping that one person believes it is the IRS. Now, earlier you mentioned pig butchering, which is basically um, getting people to invest in cryptocurrency, but they're not really investing in cryptocurrency, and it's a tragic scam. I mean, they're all tragic, but the scammers are going for everyone's life savings. It's like a complete wipeout. Um, in Arizona here, we've passed a new cryptocurrency kiosk law that puts in new consumer protections in place. There's a new users can only put in $2,000. The operators are liable for any fraud up to 30 days. There has to be warning signs. And lastly, you're provided a little, you need to be provided a receipt to show where the funds went, like a digital wallet, so that investigators have a starting point. Let's talk about cryptocurrencies, cryptocurrency ATMs. Briefly explain to our users, to our listeners who are not familiar with what a cryptocurrency ATM is.
Well, ATM is kind of a misnomer because normally the word ATM is used to get money out of the machine, and in crypto ATM you can only put your money in. And the point of it is to convert the cash money into cryptocurrency, but you can't get money out that way. I applaud Arizona for its recent law, and I can tell you now that there's about a dozen states that have laws that put some kind of restrictions, especially on people who recently established an account. So that's one of the hallmarks of the cryptocurrency scam, is that criminals convince someone to set up a cryptocurrency account, and then immediately they're going down to the ATM machine to stuff their cash in there. So having more restrictions on new users is appropriate. California has a law that also puts a cap of $2,000 on new accounts, and even after that, I think it only goes up to $3,000 even after the new period expires. Other states are introducing similar legislation. So by my count, there's at least a dozen states that have restrictions, and there's dozens more that have restrictions that are in the legislature under consideration. At the federal level, Senator Durbin introduced a law, but it doesn't seem to be going anywhere. So I don't see much federal momentum to put restrictions in place. In fact, the cryptocurrency industry in Washington is trying to introduce legislation that would force Arizona to change its law and make the caps much larger and less effective. So this is a debate in our country about how to handle the threat that's posed by crypto ATM machines. There's a recent report from the Treasury Department that outlines the extent to which cryptocurrency ATM machines are used in crime, and they especially point to the harm it's causing to the elderly population.
Now, thank you for sharing that, and I really appreciate that insight on the misnomer of calling an ATM. And even in Arizona, it's called the cryptocurrency kiosk law.
Yeah.
So, do you think it's more appropriate just to refer to them as kiosks?
Probably, I think so. The Treasury Department, for its part, talks about it in terms of crypto kiosks as well, and then they later on in the document introduced the term crypto ATM just because they're commonly known that way. But I think it's more appropriate to call them crypto kiosks because ATM is totally a misnomer.
Right. So, what do cryptocurrency kiosks or ATMs offer to society? If you had to argue for it, what would be the benefit to society if there is any?
Well, just saying, I don't argue for them at all. I would note, too, that the British government, for its part, banned them entirely about 3 or 4 years ago. So there are no crypto ATM machines in the UK. And some were installed and the police found them and took them out. Australia also has put pretty severe restrictions on crypto kiosks. In the US, it's being done on a state-by-state basis. And the good news is that more and more states are doing it. There's even some counties that are banning them altogether. I'm aware of that happening in Minnesota, for example. So there's nothing wrong with a county saying these things should not be allowed in our county because of the harm that they cause. I did ask one time, I talked to someone who was in the business of the crypto ATM market, and I asked him what benefit are they? And his answer was they're useful for the unbanked population. So if you don't have a bank account, you might want to be using crypto ATM machines. But I think that that's a pretty weak argument, frankly.
I really do. And then when you actually look at the fees that they charge and also the exchange rates. So let's say you had $1,000 in cash and you wanted to invest in one of the thousands of the cryptocurrencies that are out there. You put that $1,000 in, and you may only end up with $600 or $700 worth of cryptocurrency. So you've instantly lost money.
Right.
If you wanted to invest in cryptocurrency, you can do it from the convenience of your home computer or even your phone.
That's absolutely correct. That's another reason why I don't like the term crypto ATM machines, because ATM usually conveys to people a fee of 2% or 3%, whereas the fees charged by the crypto kiosks are far in excess of that and not disclosed very well too.
No, and words are important, calling it an ATM is a misnomer. I like the kiosk. I have other names for these machines, but I'll
Well,
save those for another
yeah,
day. Uh, some people have also said the name pig butchering is a horrible name, because it kind of takes a jab at the victims. It's just an awful term. I like it in the fact that it gets people's attention and it starts a conversation and it really wakes people up at a presentation or a TV interview. What is your opinion of the term pig butchering, and do you think there's a better alternate name for it?
well, I have the same opinion that you have. I think in my writing, I usually use the official terms which are investment scams, is the term that I see most often used by the FBI and the FTC. So I tend to stick to the official usage of the term. But I do understand completely what you just said earlier, that it's a very um, inflammatory sounding word that really wakes people up. And I tell you, the U.S. And the U.S. government needs waking up on this issue. So I'm not opposed to its usage if it has a positive effect.
All right, I give you a magic wand and you can change anything in the way our government handles scams. What would be the first thing you would do?
The number one thing I would do is to appoint someone to be in charge of fraud policy in the United States. And that would be best done at the White House level, but it could also be done at DHS or the FBI or DOJ. My preference is the White House because that's what we've done before when confronted with major societal issues like drugs in the 1980s. We established a White House drug czar in the White House. It's called ONDCP. More recently, with ransomware, we talked about this. When ransomware became a threat, the White House established an office called the Office of the National Cyber Director to safeguard the U.S. from cyber threats. So in the case of scams, I think we just need to use the same playbook that we've always used and create a White House official or office that focuses on this issue. They then could do a better job of coordinating the various agencies than the agencies can do on their own. So that would be the number one thing that I would do.
Thank you for sharing. I'm going to start pushing that, Ken. We need a scam czar at the cabinet level at the White House.
Well,
I
and
love it.
if you want to help push that, there's a recent bill. It was introduced on December 11th by a Republican and a Democratic representative, Representative Shreve from Indiana and Representative Whitesides from California, introduced a bill that would establish an office in the White House. So that's something that I'd like to bring people's attention to. There is a bill in Congress that would create this.
So we need to start a buzz. I love it. Ken, how does our audience get more information on the work that you guys do?
Well, a lot of what we do is on our website, I'm proud to say. The website's called stopscamsalliance.org. And we have on there on the homepage, I have the statements for the record. I've now written 4 for the U.S. Congress that explains what we've been talking about today. We also have about half a dozen op-eds that we've written for major newspapers that explain it in very short, 2-page kind of format. And then we have a media page. And on the media page, we have some of the presentations that I've given and the podcasts that I've given, so people can dig into those if they want to.
All right. I'm going to give you the last word. Anything I didn't ask you about that you wanted to share with our audience?
Well, so one thing that just occurred to me is a couple of months ago, the Wilson Center approached me. The Wilson Center is a think tank in Washington, D.C., housed in the Ronald Reagan building. It was created by Congress, funded in part by Congress, and they asked me to become a distinguished fellow working for them. So I'm now, one of the hats that I wear is to work as a distinguished fellow for the Wilson Center. And the reason that they asked me to join them, they normally do foreign policy work, but they've come to realize that scams is a foreign threat. And they want to help bring awareness to this and to raise it to the administration's level so that we can get executive branch and congressional action.
Beautiful. Well, congratulations. That's awesome. So, Ken, I just want to thank you, one, for giving up your time today and sharing your expertise. And I just, as a fellow fraud fighter, I want to say thank you, because there aren't enough of us, and we have to work together and collaborate and share ideas and encourage each other. I learned things today just chatting with you, and it's very motivating for me as well. Gives me some ideas that I can use out here in Arizona. And keep up the good work. And we're going to have you on again in the future and talk about some additional topics.
Okay, well, wonderful. Well, it's actually one more thing we're doing is we've raised the money to do a new Gallup survey. You know, we've talked in this podcast about the lack of data and how so few people report. Well, you can measure this much better with a national survey like through Gallup. So that's in the field now. We're going to be getting the results back in a few weeks, and then a report should be available in May. So that's our contribution to getting more data out there about the prevalence of scams and how they happen and what we can do to raise our defenses to fight back. And I appreciate you very much having me on your show today. I enjoyed talking to you. And if you would like to have some follow-up, I'm all for it.
Beautiful. Thanks, Ken. So that's the show for today, everybody. We will be back next week. I'm actually bringing in a former colleague of mine from IRS Criminal Investigation. His name is Special Agent Christopher Scheer. And we're going to cover some of the same topics we did today, just maybe from a different angle, from an agent who's doing investigations as we speak. So thank you all for watching. Let's Talk About Scams. We'll see you next Tuesday morning. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Well, that's all the knowledge for this episode. Tune in every Tuesday at 8 a.m. Pacific Time on K4HD Radio at k4hd.com as Joyce explores a variety of knowledge so you have the power to make scam protection your healthy habit. And until then, feel free to reach out to Joyce and let's talk about scams.